Lovely to have you here for this event on the road to net zero and stuff, to talk a bit about the grid. We in the UK, we have some quite ambitious targets for renewable energy. We're hoping that by 2030, on the road to net zero, we will have we have almost 100% clean power by 2030. That's our ambition, at least maybe 95% clean power by then. We do hope to have, by 2030, around 50 gigawatt of offshore wind, nearly 50 gigawatt of solar, nearly 30 gigawatt of onshore wind, so we've got quite ambitious aspirations for the UK. But we know that grids, getting a working grid, making sure all of that goes smoothly is really important to realising those ambitions and making sure we can do this in as efficient a way as possible, guaranteeing energy security and predictability for developers and investors, and all of that. And it hasn't, in truth, always worked perfectly. I think we're all learning. My cat's distracting me. Connection times to the grid can take a very long time and have got worse. We have traditionally operated this on a kind of first come, first serve basis, and that isn't always the most efficient way to do it, as we've discovered. So we're working to rectify some of that. So we're going to hear some presentations today from, we were going to start with a presentation about the UK's kind of ambitions and where we've got to in general from a colleague from our Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, our Ministry for Energy Security and Net Zero in the UK. He is on his way here but stuck on a flea talker, apparently, coming in from the airport, which has got into trouble with signal failure. So I don't know if this is connected to Spain and Portugal. I hope not. But we'll see. But he is coming in from Gardermoen, but he should be joining us in a little while. But we will also hear a little bit from colleagues from NESO, our energy system operator, and from our Ofgem, our energy regulator, about our experience and what we're trying to do to make things work smoothly with our grid. And we also later have a colleague joining us online, wasn't able to be here in person, to talk a little bit from the perspective of Great British Energy. And if you haven't clocked what Great British Energy is, it's a new sort of renewable energy company, an ambition to accelerate renewable energy in the UK, which was set up by our new government that took office last July. And the hope is that I can hear my voice. The hope is that I guess that company GB Energy will try and become a bit like Statkraft. Might take a little while until we become Statkraft, but anyway, until they become Statkraft, but that's the ambition. So we'll hear also a little bit from them about how it looks like from the perspective of a developer. But that is all to come. And then after all those presentations, Yoon, who I'm going to hand over to in a moment, is going to have a bit of a moderator panel discussion. And there'll be an opportunity for everyone here to get involved as well and ask some questions. And then after all that, you can go to the garden and have some drinks. So I think that's the plan, Yoon. Does that sound like I've got that roughly right? Perfect. So I think I'm going to hand over to you to kick us off and take us forward.
Thank you.
Sounds good? Great, thank you.
Sounds excellent. I don't think I'll need that, actually. Thank you, John. I just wanted to say, in my role at Norwegian Energy Partners, we've been working together with the UK government, but also with the ambassadors of the UK here in Oslo a lot. And I think the first time I was there was 15 years ago, and we had this Norwegian UK type supply chain event, bringing Norwegian supply chain together with the UK supply chain. And I think that's one of the questions I wanted to put afterwards, and I think I got some help for that as well. How can we work more together with the UK? Now, I'm honored to be asked to moderate this and have a few words around it as well. And the Thvina, who's here somewhere, who asked me about that, said, it's easy. I'll give you the questions and I'll give you the guys who knows all about it. And then I said, yes, fine, I'll do that. But then I discovered that grid in the UK is very difficult. extremely complicated, and I've never seen that many acronyms in my whole life, at least new acronyms to me. So I think these guys will tell us a bit more about that. With that, we'll start with Neil, and as Jan said as well, keep your questions for afterwards. We'll have a good round of questions because I believe that some of you know these acronyms and the grid system in the UK better than I do as well. So we'll expect some good questions afterwards. Neil Copeland is Connections Strategy Manager at NESO, National Energy Systems Operator in the UK. And I think it was interesting to see that you're working to align the connections process with the strategic plans. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? And then you create the Clean Power Auction Action Plan. Is that the CPAP?
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I thought. And then you have the Strategic Special Energy Plan, which is coming afterwards.
Yeah.
Is that the SSEP? Ah, fantastic. Then we are on a roll. Please, Neil, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity of speaking to you today. As Young said, my name is Neil Copeland. I'm a strategy manager in the National Energy System Operator in GB, so Great Britain. We don't, I think the flag says GB, Great Britain and Northern Ireland. NESO is the system operator for the Great Britain energy system. Northern Ireland is sort of separate framework and a separate process for operating the grid and managing connections to the grid. So I'm talking about what happens in Great Britain today. Before I go on to the slides, just wanted to explain some context. So NESO is a relatively young organisation. We moved into the public sector in October last year. We were previously part of National Grid Group, where National Grid had both the transmission owner function and the system operator function. Most of the networks in Europe, it's a TSO, it's a single organisation that carry out both of those functions. When we became NESO, we entered into public ownership and we got some new responsibilities, including providing advice to the regulator and government on various issues. And in August, when we got a new government in the UK, we were asked to provide advice on pathways to clean power by 2030. And that was 95% operating time without unabated gas. So we provided advice to government in November last year. And I think Max was going to speak, or sorry, Paul was going to speak a little bit about the plan. But essentially, we provided a number of pathways based on the pipeline of projects and taking into account system operability and security of supply, and provided that advice to government, who adopted that with some changes into the Clean Power Action Plan, which was issued before Christmas last year. We, at the same time, developed frameworks for aligning with that plan. And we had been thinking about how you aligned the connections process with strategic planning, but we weren't expecting to do that for another year or so. So the new government accelerated thinking on how you introduce technological requirements and alignment with particular technology requirements. And I'll come back to that a bit later. This slide just sets out a bit of the context of why we were working on reform before the Clean Power Action Plan was commissioned. UK already had an ambitious set of net zero targets, but we had a queue size that was very big, and if you asked for a connection, you would be offered a connection out into the late 2030s if you wanted to connect a 1 gigawatt wind farm in Scotland, for example. The dates were also sort of pushed out and driving network reinforcements. So because we've got 750 gigawatts in our connections queue, we've got significantly more generation than might be required by 2050, almost twice what might be required by 2050. So projects were entering the queue but not progressing and not leaving the queue. So there was a need to reform the overall process. So we're moving from a system of first come, first served, where you pay your money for your connection offer and you'll receive an offer and you'll be connected eventually, to a process of first ready, first needed, first connected. So we'll align with the permitted capacities within the government's Clean Power Action Plan and provide connection offers out to those permitted capacities out to 2035, and projects which are readier, and I'll come back in a few minutes to what that means, will receive connection offers first and be prioritised. Projects which are less ready may not be in the queue once it's reformed. It depends on the permitted capacities and the level of readiness of the population of projects. We're moving from a world where any developer can apply for a connection at any time to a series of gated application windows, and those will happen every 6 months or so is our expectation at the moment. Today, we only have one kind of connection offer, and that's a full connection offer. So you're contracted, you'll have a connection date, a point of connection, a date of connection, and how much money you have to pay to connect. In the future, we're going to have two options: a gate one offer, which will provide an indicative point of connection or an indicative date of connection, but you don't have a contractual position and you don't have a place in the connections queue based on that. And then we'll also have a gate two offer, which will be more analogous, similar to today's connection offer, where you have a queue position, you have a date, and you have something bankable. Currently, to be in the connections queue, you pay your money, you're in. There's no requirements around having land, having planning permission. In the future, we're moving to a world where to be in the queue, you have to have land for your project at least, and then you have to continue demonstrating progress towards energisation to retain your place in the queue. This is going to allow us to move from reactive reinforcements to the transmission system towards more proactive reinforcements of the transmission system. And I'm sorry, I'm about to go into some acronyms. We've got the connections network design methodology, which will set out how we design the transmission system from the point of connection to the main integrated transmission system. We'll have something called the centralised strategic network plan, which will design the integrated transmission system, the bit of the transmission network that is responsible for the bulk transfer of power from one part of the country to another. And both of those things in the future will be informed by something called the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan, which will tell us where in the parts of the country different types of generation, different projects should be best sited. And that will allow for more proactive development of the transmission system. And together, all of those things should allow us to handle the backlog of real projects seeking to connect. Getting from where we've been to where we are has been a long journey. This is meant to be a road. In June 2023, before I was part of the organisation, NISO published something called December 2023, published its final recommendations on connections reform. And at that point, the framework for reforming the queue was only based on readiness. There was nothing in there to do with aligning with a strategic plan. And it was only going to apply to new projects entering the queue after that date. We moved forward to April, and that introduced the modifications to the industry governance arrangements, but it also brought in retrospective application of the readiness requirements, and NISO worked to develop methodologies. As I mentioned earlier, the new government came in July 2024 and commissioned NISO to deliver the Clean Power Action Plan. As part of that accelerated our thinking about how we accelerate or how we align the connections process with strategic plans rather than just readiness. We had been thinking about doing that in another year's time from now, maybe a year after that, aligning with the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan, but government forced us to, or asked us to accelerate our thinking. A lot of work went on last year in terms of working groups, in terms of thinking about what the new process should look like in terms of industry governance. And those modifications went to Ofgem towards the end of last year for them to make a decision, and Ali might speak more about this later on, but the modifications were approved earlier on this month, and we'll be working to implement them over the summer. So this is just a different look at the timeline, going through from 2024 and the policy work. 2025, we've got Ofgem's decision and we're preparing for implementation. In 2026, by the end of this year and into the start of next year, revised connection offers should be going out for the queue. We've had over 60 work groups in that time on the industry governance. 1,500 transmission applications when we do implement will need to be reviewed in around 5 months. We got 172 consultation responses across 4 different sets of consultation, and a number of working group members and methodology consultation responses, all required to give effect to connections reform and make sure it's robust and giving out sensible connection offers. This is a high-level view, sort of zooming out of the process that will be run over the summer to get new revised offers out by the end of next year. Sorry, this year. This year for anybody on the live stream that's panicking hearing me say that. The application window will open in June, and then later on in the year we will assess project readiness and strategic alignment, and people will know whether or not they are in the queue in September. There'll then be a period of work undertaking engineering assessment and just understanding what network is required to connect different parties, and revised offers will then follow. So this is trying to boil it down to tell you what you need to be considered to be in the reformed queue. You need to be ready, so you have to have land or planning. So in the UK and in England and Wales, we have a development consent order process. And if you have a validated application for DCO, then you'll be considered ready. And then you have to strategically align. So you have to be eligible for protections, align with government's Clean Power Action Plan, be a designated project, or, this one's changed, be transmission connected demand or a distinct technology. So run-of-river hydro, geothermal, non-GB generation. So that's GB generation outside of Great Britain, but not connected to another system. If you know of X-Links, which is a project looking to build renewables in Morocco and connect to the GB system, that's an example of non-GB generation. That's how you would tick the strategic alignment requirement. And this next slide has become a bit famous on LinkedIn. It's referred to as the bingo card slide. And it's how we intend to form the reformed queue. I'm not going to go through it all. One of my colleagues is much better at explaining it than I am, but that's because she wrote it. The top row of grey numbers is the current queue of our technology. The second row, we're beginning to identify those projects which benefit from what we call protections. And there's a range of protections, and I think Jong's going to ask me about them later on, so I won't go into too much detail on them now. But if your project's mature, then we don't want to slow down the development and delivery of your project, and reform will not negatively impact upon your project. You'll be in the queue. The yellow projects are those projects on row 4 which have submitted planning consent, and the red projects are those projects which only have land rights. So the least mature of the mature projects, they meet the minimum requirements to get into the queue. We will allocate the projects against the permitted capacities in the plan first if they are protected. So batteries, for example, is an oversubscribed technology, and we will allocate the green protected battery projects against the permitted capacity of the plan first. Then, if there is capacity left, we'll allocate projects which have submitted planning against the permitted capacity in the plan. And finally, those projects which only have land rights. Now, in the case of batteries, there's unlikely to be capacity left after the protected projects. So there's currently around 50 gigawatts of battery projects we expect to be protected and included in the reformed queue. The Clean Power Action Plan only has permitted capacity for around 30 gigawatts. So we will all be providing connection offers in excess of what the plan says is required. And then there's unlikely to be further capacity available until the first strategic spatial energy plan becomes available. Thank you very much for listening. I think there'll be an opportunity for questions later, but I hope that was helpful. Thank you. Handing over to
Thank you so much, Neil. I think we'll just move on from there. I have been lucky today because Max Dowland from the DESNES, or Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, has arrived. He's not stuck on the Flytoget anymore. So that's great. Great trip, Max. You made it.
You.
Max is the Senior Energy Strategy Advisor at the Clean Power Unit, at which you lead the renewables team, as far as I understand. And I think it's interesting. You are unblocking barriers for renewable development. So I think that's the most important part of what you do. And you have some experience from oil and gas. So you probably know Norway as well to some extent. So welcome.
Thank
And the
you.
floor is yours. Now you will talk about, you were supposed to be the first.
Yes,
in a row.
I was, yeah. So
Now
we're
you're
doing
the
it in a
second,
weird
so
order
you
now.
might have to adapt a bit, but please.
Yes.
The floor is yours, and I think we have another presentation up front. Could you help us sort that out? Maybe you can just pull it backwards. There we go. Excellent. Thank you, Max.
Thank you.
Yours.
Yeah, I had a great tour of the Norwegian trains earlier, so glad to be here. So nice to meet you all. So nice to meet you. I work in the Clean Power Unit in DESNES, or DESNS, whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to give you kind of a bit of an overview of the Clean Power Action Plan, and in particular, I think the main interest of this discussion is about the network connections piece and the connection queue. The Clean Power Action Plan, Clean Power by 2030 is one of the government's, or the UK government's, key missions. It's part of our aim to become a clean energy superpower. The Clean Power Action Plan itself was published in December to tackle some of the key challenges that I think a lot of energy sector issues has around addressing energy security and affordability, also enabling sort of supply chain and the workforce to enable the deployment of low carbon technologies that you want to deliver, or that we want to deliver for 2030, and also aiming to reduce emissions across the sector in line with our targets. I'll just note as well, actually, I think there's some perhaps speculation or questions about whether or not the recent views on defence spending and whatnot have changed the priorities. I just want to confirm that this is still a priority for us to deliver clean power by 2030. And in the Energy Summit that happened recently, our Prime Minister, I think, kind of reiterated those points about what a priority it is. So in the Clean Power Action Plan, we sort of defined some specific targets we're aiming for by 2030. I think the key kind of headline metric that everyone's heard of is that we're aiming for a system that has 95% low carbon generation. So that's up to 5%, at least 95%, I'm sorry. So that'd be 5% of unabated gas, perhaps. Alongside that, we have a few other metrics that we're tracking progress against. So in particular, we view that the system will be able to generate enough clean power to cover all of our consumption, and also that we'll be able to reduce emissions for the system from about 170 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hours down to below 50. I will go to the next slide. So as part of the Clean Power Action Plan, we published these capacity ranges called the Clean Power Capacity Ranges, which was essentially working with NESO's modelling that they provided to us when they set out their advice, and our own internal modelling. We set out these capacity ranges. And in summary, what they are is they're two sort of pathways to delivering the objective of Clean Power 2030. One of them is deploying more renewables and batteries, and the other pathway is more low carbon, long duration flexibility, for example, power CCUS. The pathways are not sort of, we're choosing one or the other. It's kind of a spectrum of what you could deliver on either side. You could arrive in the middle. So there's not sort of one, it's not one or the other. So we are, sorry. Okay, sorry. Problem with the clicker there. Yeah, so these capacity ranges are very ambitious, and we're aware. In some cases, particularly for renewables, We're looking at doubling the deployment, or in tripling in some cases, for instance, with solar. So we understand that this is a really big challenge, but the Clean Power Unit's been set up to deliver this, and we're looking to really work with industry to unblock the barriers to 2030. A lot of the projects, we understand, will generally be in the pipeline of deployment already. So we really want to work with industry to understand how we can accelerate and unblock a lot of the capacity. And we're already doing a lot of the actions to deliver that at the moment at pace. I'll note that I think there's an estimated investment figure of around 40 billion a year from today to 2030 is the estimate across generation and transmission. This slide is just setting out this kind of different generation profiles across both of those pathways, the more renewables pathway or the more low carbon flex pathway, and compared against the 2023 system. I think the main thing to note from this is that renewables in either instance is giving the majority of the generation in a 2030 system, and particularly offshore wind. Now going back to kind of some of the barriers that we're looking to address. So this is a graph of the connections queue. In orange is the queue and installed capacity, and onto the right-hand side of the orange bars are the two different pathways. You can see from the queue that there is more capacity than there is in the Clean Power 2030 pathways, although this is kind of one of the issues we're trying to address. So there's over 700 gigawatts of capacity of projects in the queue, and at the moment, the process for addressing the connections process is not sort of working to accelerate the deployment in the way that we need for Clean Power 2030. The sort of first come, first serve process is sometimes blocking projects that might be more ready to progress from getting their connections at earlier dates, and that's why we're seeing some projects not getting connections until the late 2030s or even, I think, 2040s in some instances too. So for us, we're very keen that we have a process that addresses that issue and looks to bring forward projects that can deploy in the 2030 timeframe and accelerates deployment for Clean Power 2030. And I think, as Neil's already spoken about, and Ali will talk on a bit later. So this is like a key action for us. And we also want to align these reforms with our strategic aims for clean power by 2030. Because that's what we're aiming to deliver, so it makes sense that the connections process would align with our strategic aims. I'll note that it's not just the connections process that's sort of a blocker. We also need to address a lot of transmission network infrastructure as well, build out. So NESO identified about 88 projects that would be key to accelerate in order to deliver clean power by 2030. They are three of them, which I think are a little bit beyond the 2030 timeframe that we're looking to accelerate, and the Clean Power Unit's taking a really active role in making sure that we can accelerate them and try to keep them on track for delivery. And we are addressing a lot of actions through the action plan, for instance, with our planning and consents regime. We're doing a lot of reform. We've got a planning and infrastructure bill that's going through. We're also doing a lot of work on supply chains and workforce. We've got a series of forums that we've set up to help address some of the issues around delivering some of this. And then the last slide, this is just that, it's not just about the networks piece, but we have a lot of wider actions we're trying to deliver. Obviously, market reform is a key area. I think REMA is a hot topic of discussion. For instance, say supply chain and skills is another key area we're looking to address and help accelerate deployment. We've got a low carbon flexibility roadmap coming out on renewables. We've got the onshore wind task force report. We've got the solar roadmap. We have also got allocation round 7 coming up fairly soon, which is a big milestone, a big piece for Clean Power 2030 as well. That was my quick run through of everything, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Max. You can have a deserved seat, but I'd just like to comment that I like your mention of UK as the clean energy superpower, from coal all the way over to the clean energy superpower. So I like that. Now, have a seat and then we'll have a discussion afterwards.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Alistair McMillan, who's Head of Connections Policy at Ofgem, where he is delivering the Connections Action Plan, which is actually the end-to-end review of the connections regulation and the connections process reform, as we have been seeing it here now. So please, Alistair, the floor is yours. Let's hear a bit more from you.
Okay, thanks,
and we'll
Jon.
need some technical help here as well. There you go. Thanks.
Great, thanks.
It's been
Thanks, Jon. I actually called you John earlier, so I'm already working on my Norwegian pronunciation. It's Jon, isn't it? Jon. Yeah, hi everyone. Good to be here. So my name's Ali, or Alistair McMillan. As Jon said, I'm Head of Connections Policy at Ofgem. Ofgem itself is also an acronym. Apologies for that. It actually stands for the Office for Gas and Electricity Markets. So we are the independent regulator in GB for gas and electricity. So I guess just to kind of define sort of why the three of us are here and our roles in relation to one another. Obviously government, that's the easy bit. You're elected, you serve the elected government, and government have obviously their own strategic priorities. That's Clean Power 2030. As the independent regulator, so we have certain powers in legislation to act independently of government to regulate the gas and electricity markets. So we're sort of responsible for, I guess, sort of shaping the reforms that came through the system operator for connections reform, but also for approving them. So it's a sort of difficult situation that we're in, where we know what solution we kind of want from connections reform, but also as the ultimate decision maker, we need to make sure we maintain the ability to take the decision at the end of the process. And of course, we've got the system operator, who we also regulate. So formerly part of National Grid and were nationalised sometime last summer, I think, October. So not only are we regulating the kind of connections process, but we're also regulating the system operator. So it's a bit of a kind of tricky tripartite relationship, but I think it works. So I'm just going to take a step back. I'll be a bit more high level, coming from the regulator's perspective. Obviously, we've gone into the mechanics of what the new connections process looks like, so what you have to do to get a place in that connections queue. And we've also heard about the overarching strategic priorities of Clean Power 2030. I just wanted to kind of take a step back, and I've deliberately left what is actually a pretty old slide in the pack. This kind of takes us back to, I guess, like early last year, when we were sort of trying to frame and trying to understand, what is the problem with connections? What are we trying to solve here? So you can see on the left-hand side here, you've got a kind of traditional journey that you take through the process in connecting to the grid as a developer. You'd make your very simple. You'd make your application to the network operator. You'd be offered a connection date. You'd then be placed in the queue. There is post-acceptance a possibility to modify your application. If you needed to push your date back, for example, you would submit a mod app to the system operator. But that's you kind of in the queue. You've got a place. Great. We expect you to progress your project towards connection. But ultimately, there's two pathways that you could end up taking. You could either connect, or you could be removed if you fail to meet a planning milestone, for example. Or you could leave of your own accord, so you could terminate your own project. And the actual connection date that you'd be offered as part of the process, there are sort of certain factors that would determine what that date is. So obviously, the network company has to assess what other connections are in the queue. So what is your interaction with the rest of the queue? So, are you first in line in a particular area? Are you 10th, for example? What's the earliest connection date that you as a developer can bring your project forward for energization? What's the availability of network capacity? So can you be plugged in? And in terms of delivery of network infrastructure, so thinking about the kind of wider, as we call them, wider works in GB, so the big sort of long distance transmission highways, which can take from start to finish 14 years, given 7 of which is planning, by the way, in GB. And that's an area that government are also looking at streamlining to sort of speed things up. So the basic problem, if we just move to the right-hand side of the slide, is that, and I think this is similar to Norway, the networks, and remember we're talking a year ago here, they were required to provide a connection offer to all applicants on a non-discriminatory basis and on a first-come, first-served basis. So you turn up to apply for a connection, and you have to be offered a connection, basically. And we used to make like comparisons with, say, a wind farm in Trafalgar Square, for example. If you applied to the network operator for that project, that you would get a place in the queue. They couldn't make an assessment of how likely that is to occur, which is obviously pretty unlikely. Though obviously along the journey, you would have development milestones you'd have to meet. One of which is demonstrating land rights, which you wouldn't get for Trafalgar Square, and the other one is demonstrating planning consent, which clearly, again, you wouldn't get for a wind farm in Trafalgar Square. But that highlights just kind of how easy it was to get into the queue. So very low entry requirement, and a sort of lack of ability, really, for the system operator to regularly terminate what would be deemed as speculative projects. Thanks, John. So what this has resulted in, and Max touched on it, is a very bloated queue across transmission and distribution. And I checked the figures this morning. It's now 771 gigawatts. And it's probably in excess of 2 to 3 times more than GB actually needs for its net zero objectives in 2050. The reality on the ground is that waiting times for developers are too long. If you apply for a connection, you'll apply for, or you'll suggest a date that you'd like your connection to be. Only 14% of projects were getting those dates, and the average delay, the average delay was 5 years for the remaining projects. So on average, you would be given a date 5 years beyond the one that you requested. Many of these projects, as we've said, the wind farm in Trafalgar Square, they're speculative, they're poorly developed. Lots of speculators would sort of conceive of a project, get in the queue, and then try and sell it. And those projects were blocking viable, needed projects that we need for Clean Power 2030 from being able to connect quickly. So everything was bloated, everything was a mess, there was far too much in there. The challenge is, how can we get rid of that? How can we streamline that queue to make sure we can connect the right projects quickly? 2/3 of those projects in the queue require some sort of network reinforcement. That creates problems for the networks. They need a clear signal about what network planning or what network reinforcement is needed to connect the queue. And because the queue was so bloated, that signal was not aligned with top-down strategic plans, which we'll come on to in a minute. The technology mix was also misaligned, so the market wasn't delivering an efficient technology mix. Far too much battery storage, far too much solar. Those are the easiest, generally, projects for developers to conceive. They're hugely oversubscribed relative to need. So we're in a position where the new government came in, as Max has talked about. Clean Power 2030 mission, it's clear that significant intervention was required to align the connections process with those strategic priorities. It's clear that if we did nothing to the connections process, Clean Power 2030 was impossible. So connections is really the kind of key enabler to achieve a Clean Power 30 system. If you can't connect the projects you need, then you're never going to achieve your strategic ambitions. So yeah, this fundamental reform is hopefully what we've now delivered. That we've done the hard bit. We've done the easy bit, which is design it. Now we're into implementation, and we'll see how that goes. This is just a kind of high-level framing of what really the connections problem sort of looked like in GB. And I imagine this will resonate, I think, with most countries around the world. So you've got the problem at the top. Average waiting times to connect to the grid are too long. So that delays the benefits of a clean power net zero system. So why are waiting times so high? There's effectively two main problems. There's a queuing problem. So I've just talked about that. Unready speculative projects are blocking viable needed ones from coming forward. And we have a system, a first come, first serve, non-discriminatory system that cannot prioritize which projects connect and where. And there's also a network capacity problem. So existing connection capacity is constrained and new connection assets take too long to build. So how are we solving this? So connections reform deals with, so that's not what, the left, basically. So what it does is it prioritizes viable projects and it prioritizes projects in line with strategic plans. So in terms of prioritizing viable projects, so that's the readiness thresholds that you have to demonstrate now to get into the queue. and also financial commitments. So once you're in the queue, we want to make sure that the developer has skin in the game and they're demonstrating the viability of their project by fronting a financial commitment, which is obviously recoverable later if you remain in the queue. And obviously prioritising projects in line with strategic plans, as Max talked about Clean Power 2030, so a system that is able to filter out projects that we don't need and is able to prioritise important projects for the system, for example, for security of supply. Now, the network capacity problem, this is the kind of key point about connections reform, I think. Connections can only get you kind of half of the way there. So you design this new connections process, you create a queue of the right projects, that's all well and good, but you still need to connect them. And to connect them, you need network capacity. So there's two kind of key pillars there for how to solve that. We need to maximize use of what we've got. So we obviously have a lot of network already. Are we making the best use of it? So there's lots of kind of actions being worked through by NESO and the distribution network operators regarding the kind of technical rules around how the system is being used to be able to release more capacity without actually building anything. And also sharpening incentives on network operators with regards to the connection dates, so making sure they're directly incentivized to meet those dates and developers are not facing delays kind of out with their control. And there's also the accelerate new connection capacity point. So sharpening incentives for enabling work, so making sure network companies through their price controls are able to build ahead of need where possible. There are trade-offs there, and I'm sure we'll come on to that in the Q&A. And also sharpen incentives on wider work. So that's the kind of bigger, larger scale, big strategic projects that can take a long, long time to build. So making sure that we are getting ahead of the game, and we're making sure that long lead time projects are coming forward now because we know that we'll need them in 2040, for example. And we're solving that through the connections end-to-end review, which we'll come into in a second, and through mechanisms in the price controls. So just quickly touching on the connections end-to-end review then. So there's effectively kind of two pillars to connections reform as we think about it with Ofgem. We've got process reform, that's what we've been talking about. Now, we also need regulatory reform to keep pace with process reform, and that's where the connections end-to-end review comes in. So this is about ensuring that the regulatory framework, so the network operators are licensed. These are big, long documents, rule books basically of how they conduct their business. We want to ensure those regulations drive the behaviours and outcomes that we need to see in this new connections process that we've created. And there's two key outcomes that we're trying to drive here. So better standards of service, and that what I'm talking about there is a standard of service that you, as the connecting customer, receive from the network company, and also timelier connections delivered. So basically, what's in scope of this project is the entire connecting customer journey across transmission and distribution, generation and demand. So if you're feeding into the system, if you're taking from the system, we want to make sure that the regulatory framework gives you a good outcome. Where we are in this is a long process. As you can imagine, the huge scope of this project is everything relating to connections behaviours. We've published an initial consultation already. We're now working through those responses that we received to understand in more detail where the issues are in the connections regulations and how can they be solved and addressed. I'll come on to the 7 key themes on my last slide in a second. So we identified 7 key themes for where we think we need to make improvements within regulations. And within each theme in the consultation, which maybe some of you have even had the pleasure of reading in the room, we set out the problem statement, summarise the issues that we know about, propose solutions, and seek feedback on those. And there are clear links and overlaps with the design of the price controls. So what we're hearing from stakeholders about the state of connections regulations is informing the work that's taking place now in setting the incentives and requirements in the price controls on network companies. And the next step of this process will be in summer 2025 when we respond with firmer proposals. These are the kind of 7 key themes. I'll leave them up there. But there's sort of 3 that I want to focus on, and those are the 3 on the right-hand side. So basically, in bold is what we're trying to achieve, and then below that is a sort of short explanation of what that means. Now, number 3, when we published this consultation, this is the one that I think understandably got the most attention in the trade press, which was requiring networks to meet connection dates. So the the statement here is that network companies and the system operator should meet agreed customer connection dates in connection agreements without delays. And this is in response to what we heard from a lot of connecting customers, and again, maybe some of you in the room will have felt this frustration, where your connection date, you're doing all you can to bring your project forward for connection, but then the network company unilaterally moves your date back. And that's obviously very frustrating. It impacts on the whole revenue stream and the business model of the project. So are we doing enough in the regulatory framework to make sure that doesn't happen? Can we do more to require and incentivize network companies to meet those connection dates? Number 4 there is about the quality of offers and associated documentation. So if you apply for a connection, are you being as informed as you should be by the network company as to what's in your offer and what could determine potential issues with the date that they're able to provide you? And number 5, again, this sort of relates to 3 really. So let's sort of put ourselves in a situation where we've tightened the requirement on the network company to meet connection dates, and we say you will be fined significant amounts of money if you don't meet the connection date that you've offered the customer. Well, then they would naturally be incentivized to offer very unambitious connection dates to ensure that they meet them. That's just natural, sort of human psychology. So what we need to do is make sure we counter 3 with 5 and require them to offer as ambitious a date as possible. So that as a developer, when you apply for your connection, the date you're offered is ambitious, and the network company is absolutely required to meet that date, do all they can to do that. So yeah, there's lots of work to do here. This is going to take 2 to 3 years. There'll be quick wins, there'll be things that take longer, but we're committed to making sure that the regulatory framework for connections drives the right outcomes we need to see in the new connections process for connecting customers. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you so much, Alistair. And with that, we have, the connections team, I think we can call it, and then we have another partner, another participant in the panel, Paul Addison. Is he here on the screen soon? Maybe?
Can you tell me if you can hear me?
Now, while we wait, there you are, Paul. Good to see you. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
That's very good, but we can't hear you. That's normal, isn't it? Now then. Can we hear you now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can hear you fine, and I'm happy to start when you're ready.
Okay, if you turn off the volume, then we can hear you better.
He can just start his presentation.
Okay, now I'll introduce you very briefly, Paul. You are Director of Policy and External Affairs at the GB Energy, in which role you are also taking part in the leadership group of GB Energy, and you're responsible for shaping and delivering the policy agenda, and doing the external affairs, of course, it comes with the title, I believe, and also to enable the delivery of the mission of GB Energy. You previously were policy advisor to the opposition treasury team, and you've had roles in energy in the UK for many years, and also in the city of London, I believe. So thank you for being with us. Now, the floor is yours. You also have a quick presentation, I believe.
Yeah, and I assume you can hear me okay?
Can you turn it up even a bit more, or is that...
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Raise your hand if you can hear me. Yes, that's jolly good. Right, I'll crack on that basis. I'm so sorry I couldn't be here with you in person. I'm in London today, and we're meeting a number of investors and developers, but I can assure you that your location looks far more grand than mine, and I'm happy to walk you through what British Energy has been trying to do, and its relationship with some of the other organisations that have been presenting today. Great British Energy was founded in July last year when there was a change of government, and it is principally out to be created and to be moving forward in the market for two essential reasons, which I'll kind of go through in order. Great British Energy will do two big things. The first thing is what's called the local power plan, and it will deliver upon ensuring that the public sector estate in the UK has access to the necessary finance and grants to encourage things like the adoption of rooftop solar energy, which is something we made an early commitment to a few months ago in the UK, of £180 million investment across schools and hospitals in England, in conjunction with funding made available to local communities, community investment pot, as well as devolved administrations in the UK. And then there is the more commercial element to the organisation. So Great British Energy will be loosely capitalised with about 8.3 billion following what will be the UK spending review, which is the process where finances are agreed over a set period of time, in this case 3 years period of time. And about 3 will be committed to what I just described, which is the local power plan. And the remaining 5, roughly, will be targeted and focused on new investment opportunities for the UK. Where it gets interesting is that we're explicitly in the market as an energy developer. So Great British Energy won't be a passive investor, it won't be a policy bank, it will be a hands-on energy developer, supporting projects at pre-construction phase, through planning and all the other components too, with a specific focus on catalysing new technologies in the UK market, and having them in a good place from an energy generation perspective. So on a practical level, I mean, what does that mean? Well, since July, we've been setting up as an institution and an organisation. That means doing the things you'd expect us to do, recruiting our CEO, an interim CEO presently, but also recruiting our executive leadership team, looking at where we get set up locationally. Our head office will be in Aberdeen, and there are actually very good reasons for that, with its history and its workforce that are in a very good place to adapt to some of the opportunities that we could create. But we've been aggressively speaking to the market whilst we've been getting set up. And by getting set up, by the way, what I mean by that is that we're waiting for the Great British Energy Bill to get royal assent in the in both the Commons and the Lords, which is an imminent expectation. We expect that to happen over the course of the next 2 to 3 weeks. And we've been speaking aggressively to the market over the course of the time we've been establishing ourselves. And we've loosely got about 75 projects on the commercial side, of which about 6 or 7 are, I would say, mature and ready to invest in, and look like they are reasonable prospects. And what kind of projects are they? I mean, they are going to be the technologies that I described. So there's a clear leaning towards floating offshore wind technology. There are projects that we'll be looking at in the northeast coast of Scotland, as well as the Celtic Sea, and we can see a real appetite there to get those projects off the ground, but they require that additional push. And equally, we've been looking closely at other associated technologies, but relevant to we see significant opportunities in the pipeline along the lines of long duration storage technologies. And what is interesting in terms of what Great British Energy can bring, in addition to partnering with the colleagues from NESO and Ofgem and others too, is that it won't necessarily be about the size of investment. We'll take ticket sizes of varying amounts over the course of the coming years, depending on the nature of the projects we choose to invest in. But the critical thing is that Great British Energy will send a signal. It will send an important signal to markets, to investors that the government, both national and devolved and mayoral in some cases, are ready to get forward square behind significant new projects, which in itself provides the confidence that's needed. And we do see opportunities in the sectors that I've outlined. In adjacent to that, it's important to know that, you know, we can talk the good game about, you know, investing in floating offshore wind, LDS or tidal, but there is a recognition that a significant amount of our work will be needed to focus on UK supply chains. We made a first step of that process over the course of the last week, where we announced a 300 million match-funded scheme, which is in the process of opening, which will set to deliver match funders up to 600 million for offshore, the offshore industry, which in itself has been received well by the industry, and hopefully just like marks the start of greater supply chain focus that that will be needed. So, you know, for us over the course of the next let's say 6 months, what are the focus areas going to be? Well, number one is once we get Boiler 7, it won't be too long after where the organisation becomes its own entity and operates in the market. We have very, very productive conversations with global partners, whether it's you know, whether it's an Ørsted or an Equinor or a Vattenfall, or all different types of organisations that are similar and present on the continent. But we'll be entering that process of separating out as an entity and being prepared to operate in the market. We will be engaging with a process called the Statement of Strategic Priorities, where our shareholder, who's the Secretary of State for Energy in the UK, where we will be outlining collectively between the shareholder and Great British Energy as an entity what the areas of focus will be for the organisation between now and the end of the decade. Then, not long from that point onwards, we will be establishing our business plan, which will be done in consultation with the department and external partners, with the view of us really getting ready to be active in the market towards the end of this year into the start of next. So I suppose my message here really is that, you know, we have a significant opportunity with Great British Energy. It's there to catalyse investment. It's there to unlock private capital, and it's, you know, it's there effectively to, you know, stimulate the confidence that's needed to get those new clean energy projects where market conditions are missing, and system needs are you know, urgent. And, you know, ultimately, as I've alluded to, the Great British Energy is not some kind of passive fund. We want to initiate and lead projects where necessary, and exit where markets are functioning effectively. So it's a familiar model. It's first mover, risk taken publicly, scale up, delivered privately in conjunction with Great British Energy along the way, and system value, if you like, returned publicly. So for us, you know, making sure that we are providing that level of additionality, and we're unlocking projects that would not be unlocked were it not for our involvement, is going to be you know, of critical importance. And we've got very high confidence that the private sector working in partnership with Great British Energy will be done in collaboration, and not necessarily you know, competition with GBE. You know, the private sector's already demonstrated an extraordinary appetite to invest in the UK. You know, even between 2010 and 2022, roughly 120 billion was invested in clean energy projects. And, you know, whilst 70% of that new clean energy capacity entering the pipeline in the last 2 years has been pre-financial close, we believe that the reforms that have been announced by NESO and some of the changes that have come forward from Ofgem, in conjunction with the work that we're doing, will ensure that those projects are unlocking. And I think one of the other elements to keep focus on in this debate about projects and new energy generation projects coming on stream is In the UK, there's the Planning and Infrastructure Bill that's moving forward, and the creation of an organisation called the National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority, which is there to accelerate infrastructure projects, reduce the amount of unnecessary consultation time for particular projects, and increase the amount of clean energy projects that are classified as nationally significant infrastructure, all meaning that the mission at the moment is to unlock as much feasible projects as possible and get things moving. That's a consistent message that you've heard from today. So if GB could play that role of absorbing some development risk early and unlocking those pipelines, we think that the opportunities in floating wind developers is there, and significant hydrogen projects seeking integrated offtake and demand certainty are there, and long duration storage providers will be able to operate with clearer market signals. It's also, worth noting that we'll be working quite closely with the UK's National Wealth Fund, which is in itself committed over 7 billion to net zero projects, and will be a critical partner to the work that we do. So the future for the relationship between the UK and investors over the next 5 years, I don't genuinely believe this is strong, and it's strong because there's a high degree of certainty. There's one thing the Clean Power Plan and the 2030 targets provide is certainty and clarity, and you can see the work that NISA are doing and the reforms that have been made to the key processes. You can see the investment that Great British Energy is willing to bring in stimulating those projects that have the potential to be scaled up in the UK. And then you combine that with some of the reforms that have been discussed by Ofgem, and you start to see that the system is pulling all the different levers to get these projects moving forward. So my guidance would be to continue to engage with colleagues in the in the embassy where you are now, and reach out to Great British Energy. We've already had visits to Oslo, and our chair was visiting in January. We've already had very productive dialogue, and I think continue to do just that. I'm very happy to take questions and answers in the follow-up session.
I just wanted to move across so you can see me as well. Hi, very good to see you. Now, we have some questions for our guests, and I'm just wondering, is it possible to have some air in between, just to kind of keep us awake? Because it might be, could we have some air indoors, because it gets very hot in here. So please have a seat. And you will stay with us, Paul, for some questions, both from myself and also from the audience here. Now, all very interesting, and as I said in the beginning, at least to me, probably not to all of you, but to me it was very complicated. Now it looks a bit easier. But anyway, I have a few questions for each and one of them, and you might have other questions, so give us a quarter of an hour or so to answer a few of those questions that you might have as well, and then we'll have some questions from you afterwards. Now, you are moving to Max first, which has the overview of the total policy. You're moving from a developer-led system to a centrally placed, strategic energy plan and this connection reform. How do you ensure that your central plans and market signals are complementary and do not work against each other?
Yeah, so I think you said we've got it was mentioned earlier, the strategic spatial energy plan that's coming out sort of next year is like the post 2030 picture of how we coordinate the system, and it's going to set recommendations for government to follow. I think as part of that process, it's really important that well, in the department and also with Ofgem and NISO, we're engaging with our markets teams, the REMA team, who are looking to bring forward final decisions on REMA. I think mid this year was the timeline we set out on the action plan, and just to make sure there's coordination between those areas, which there is ongoing. So working with what the outcome of that decision will be and how that impacts on what the future of the SEP would look like. In terms of sequencing, it's going to be the decision on REMA, and then next is SEP in terms of how the things are sequenced. But so there'll be time to kind of coordinate between those exercises.
Maybe I can just follow up on that.
Yeah.
There is a lot of uncertainty with these new reforms amongst developers, as far as I understand. And there are various reforms, both on connections and, of course, on policy altogether, but also REMA, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
How will this affect AR7, which is coming up this summer?
Yeah, it's something actually that's really on the mind of the Clean Power Unit. Of course, we kind of have come in, we really want to give as much certainty as possible on the future before AR7, ahead of AR7. I think REMA, the REMA publication, the last came out, has reiterated the same messaging, that we're conscious of the AR7 timelines and want to make sure that there is some kind of lag time between the outcome of those decisions and then entering into AR7. I think that hopefully, that will give developers kind of foresight before getting into AR7, so they have time to reflect. So yeah, we're definitely aware of that, along with tenures is another challenging area that we've heard a lot about as well. But there was actually a recent seminar on protections as well. I didn't attend it, but these are all sort of being thought through as part of the process for the kind of REMA decision-making process to give as much certainty as possible.
That's all very good, but can I have some other comments from the two of you in terms of the risk to developers, in terms of you reorganizing the queue?
Yeah, so in terms of connections, Max used the word protections, we also have a set of protections to protect those projects which are most developed. On the bingo card slide, those green coloured projects, it's projects which have secured planning consent, already have a capacity market contract or a contracts for difference contract. Projects which are in construction and due to connect by the end of 2026 are all protected from connections reform. The ones that are closer to connecting, their date and point of connection is also protected. And those that are a bit further away, it's only the fact that they're in the queue is the level of protection that they get. So it's highly unlikely the data will go backwards. It's possible, but it's unlikely. In most instances, they'll get the opportunity to ask to move earlier if they're in the reformed queue. The other sort of protection just to flag is that in terms of planning consent, if you've got planning consent by the time the application for Gate 2 opens, you're protected. If you made your application for planning consent before 20th December last year and then receive planning consent before the subsequent Gate 2 window, you will also be deemed to be protected so long as you don't exceed the permitted capacity in the plan. The last bit on protections before I pass on if Ali wants to say something. Government are also running, Ofgem are also running the long duration energy storage cap and floor process this year. So what we've said is that any projects which are successful in securing a cap and floor through that regime, but are removed from the queue as a result of connections reform, will be included in the queue in a subsequent Gate 2 window. I think that's all the protections, but there's a section on it in the methodologies if you're wanting to have a look, and there's more acronyms in there as well.
It sounds very safe and secure. I think there might be some insecurities, but we'll hear about those afterwards. How do you communicate with the industry to make this process viable for everyone?
So we've run a number of webinars and seminars, so online webinars, and there have been a number of those. We've issued a number of publications. And we also do a couple of in-person events each year where we invite customers to come and meet with us, both in rooms like this and bigger rooms, but also just to meet bilaterally. One of the bits I didn't go into very much detail on in my pack is project designation. And that's another way of strategically aligning if you're innovative, your long lead time, you're critical to security of supply. We've been having bilateral discussions with projects or developers of projects who are interested in making use of that process. So I think we've been doing a lot of engagement both out the way on broadcast, but also listening to developers and respondents in terms of consultation and responses.
Thanks. Alistair, we might go back to that afterwards, and we have some questions on investments as well, and that might kind of lead into what you do, Alistair. So you're regulating what NISO is about to do, and which is part of the policy, of course, but you're also giving the transmission owners and distribution network operators incentives to move ahead. How do you, and you're making changes to that, how do you believe that might be improving the situation for network delivery?
Yeah, so yeah, I guess there's kind of two things there. So there's and it goes back to the kind of mind map slide that I showed. We've got a connections problem and we've got a network build problem, and we need to solve them both. So how can we ensure that network operators are doing all they can to facilitate connections, through the kind of connections process? Well, that's the bit I talked about in terms of incentivizing them and requiring them through the regulatory framework to meet connection dates. Aside from that, you've got the network build problem, and this is really a challenge for the price controls. So obviously our sort of primary duty as the regulator is to protect the consumers of GB. And ultimately, at some level, however the money flows, consumers end up paying for everything. So we can sort of think about a kind of end member situation where you just give the network operators complete free rein to build everything they think they need to build to facilitate all connections out to, say, 2075. They won't get it right, so some of that will be like regret spend, and that regret spend is borne by consumers and it ends up on bills. So we need to it's a fine balance to tread between making sure that we are giving them the ability to build ahead of need, whilst making sure that they don't build things that we ultimately don't need and then consumers pay for that. And that's a delicate balance we try and strike in the price controls. I think, so ET3, so this is the third iteration of the price control for transmission owners, that commences next year. And this point around making sure that they build to facilitate the connections we need for Clean Power 2030 is a major element that's shaping the design of the price controls in terms of what we're allowing them to spend money on and what they can recover. And then there's sort of additional tools like, and I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with it, like the advanced procurement mechanism, for example, so enabling procurement to take place maybe ahead of need, because these are long lead time items, and the network companies need to ensure that their kind of costs are underwritten at an early stage, so they're not taking risk. And then there's all the reopeners as well. So within the price control period, the transmission owners can come and say, okay, we've identified this new project, and then we'll assess that project and we'll allow them to, assuming it's the right project, to fund it. So that's definitely a price control problem, but it's baked into the assessment of what will make a good price control, hopefully, that will commence in April 2026 for the transmission owners.
I think that brings us on to the actual supply question. And I'm just wondering, does the CP 2030, does it add into the industrial action plan?
Yeah, it does. So the industrial strategy is kind of like a 10-year plan. It's going to be published in spring, so pretty soon, which covers, well, the Clean Power 2030 angle of it is that we've sort of set up this Clean Power supply chain and workforce forum, where the objective is to work with industry and others to kind of really identify some of the barriers to unblocking the supply chain and also the workforce as well. And I think it convened for the first time just last week, I believe. And so through that process, we're really trying to get a grip of what are the issues so that we can tackle them directly and quickly as the unit. So that's our interest in this, try and unblock some of these sort of bottlenecks in the supply chain and skilled workforce as well.
That brings me on to you, Paul. You're still there?
Yes, 1 second.
Or here? Can you hear us?
So if you ask him.
Thank you, Paul. I'm just wondering, now we spoke about the Industrial Action Plan, which is on its way, as far as I understand. You are already there, and you have received a lot of cash. So how will you spend it? How to spend it, I think, is a section of the FT, isn't it? So is this, are you part of that industrial action plan, or how do you work with supply chain to make this happen? Or how do you plan to work with supply chain?
I understand. I think, so there are a number of things in play here. We, as I indicated, have a commitment of roughly 8.3 billion, of which the 300 million that I mentioned into offshore supply chain was effectively brought forward. I think you may be alluding to our industrial strategy, which is something that we are working very closely with colleagues in the Department of Business and Trade. And the industrial strategy has a huge amount of, how do you call it, Venn diagram opportunities, because there is a big focus on developing the industrial supply chains in the UK, and doing that in a way that maximises the potential of the domestic workforce. And just to be really concrete about that, a coordinated industrial strategy that comes to fruition over the course of spring and summer, undertaken in conjunction with the work that we will be doing as Great British Energy, and working with the clean energy industry bonus effectively, which is about promoting skilled labour in the UK, has the potential to work with folks that are in the offshore oil and gas industry in the northeast of Scotland, who work on those rigs effectively, and move them into a position where they're working on floating offshore wind technology, which the stands and the basis of them aren't too dissimilar in terms of technologies. So the answer is, the industrial strategy element to what we do, working with DBT, is really, really important, and making sure that that, well, how can I put it? The Department of Business and Trade and the Department of Energy Security, Net Zero, and GB Energy are working in close partnerships. Really important, particularly if, in conjunction with the rest of government, things like demand guarantee schemes are considered in the medium term. So, I'm keen, and I'm glad that we've got moving with the offshore wind stuff early.
That sounds great, and I'm not quite sure if you were with us as we discussed potential collaboration between the Norwegian supply chain and the British supply chain, of course, following in the footsteps of all those Norwegian developers which are here in the room, eager to build those projects in the UK. And of course, they are followed up by a number of suppliers which would like to collaborate with UK suppliers to build both grid and projects. So have you some thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I do, and I have to say that some of the more proactive engagements that we've had have come through the work that we've done here locally at the embassy, but also with the businesses you'd expect. And let's be honest, I mean, if you go to Norway, indeed other countries, you know, when it comes to leveraging the state to catalyse investments, there is a more recent history of that, whereas getting Great British Energy up and running is new for the UK relatively, having only been founded in July. So the collaboration opportunities, I think, are huge, which is why we started, you know, engaging directly to find out lessons learned and all the rest of it. But, you know, there is already multiple areas of collaboration. I can't give, how can I put it? You know, I can't go into commercial details where there are existing negotiations and non-disclosure agreements, but there are several projects where Norwegian businesses have been engaged in health.
Great. Just one larger question to all of you. Is there any learning to be had from the process you have in the UK for Norwegian, the Norwegian government, or for other governments for that sake? But it seems like you have a very fast reform, transforming the whole energy system at a rapid pace. So is there any, I mean, there's a lot of challenges, but I won't dig into all of those. So I'm sure there will be questions about those. But is there any learning to be had from, what do you think is the learning to be had from what you do?
So I think,
start with you, Alistair.
Yeah, I think you kind of have to do it decisively and quickly. You know, we did hear that we were going too fast on a number of occasions. Obviously, these are complicated policies, and they take a while to design through and implement. And you need to get it right. But the flip side of that is that, and I'm sure like developers are feeling it's a bit kind of death by reform at the moment in the UK. Everything is being reformed, and it's, you know, investor confidence is so key, and we think that, you know, the reforms will increase long-term investor confidence, but what we want to make sure is we don't damage short to medium-term investor confidence, where, you know, developers are waiting for decisions from government or the regulator or the system operator about how the process is going to work. So you've got to strike the balance between going quickly enough that you minimise damage to investor confidence, whilst also making sure you get it right. And I think we hopefully did that. You know, we just physically couldn't have taken any longer because of the impact that it would have had on developers that need to get on with progressing their projects. They need their firm connection offers to take final investment decisions. So
it's a bit like saying no to your kids and then keep them happy long term.
Yeah.
Neil, any comments on that?
Yeah, I think you have to be quite pragmatic in how you go about developing and delivering this kind of reform, especially when you're doing it quickly. But also you've got to listen, because that's how you take people with you. If you don't listen and just push through, people will inevitably push back. Not saying there hasn't been pushback and there isn't going to be more pushback, but by listening and allowing people to see where you're taking on board feedback or why you might not be taking on board feedback, that helps take people with you overall.
Max, are you
I'd
in
say,
agreement?
I'd also say I think having a kind of defined goal in a relatively short period of time also helps, like, add pressure to, you know, get things delivered to time. I think for sort of thinking about 2050, the energy system in 2050, it's quite a broad sort of, I guess, set of different scenarios that could achieve a 2050 system, but kind of shortening that time frame to 2030, you sort of only have a few options really to what you're going to deliver. So you're much more focused on what you need to deliver, and much more focused on sort of the time frames that you need to deliver those things to enable the markets to respond. So I think that also helps with generally like a lot of the work that we've been doing in the Clean Power Unit as well.
Good. I won't include you on that, Paul, because you are developing your targets and you are in the process, I believe. So we'll hear more about that afterwards. And I'm sure that a few of those developers in the room might also want to ask you a bit about your developer role. So let's listen to those then and take it to you in the audience if you have any questions to the panel. Please, go ahead. Wait a second, I think we have a mic, not because we can't hear you, because you're loud and clear, but because those on the stream won't hear you.
Yes, thank you. Ottar Alme from Fred Olsen Renewables. Fred Olsen Renewables have been in the UK since the late 90s, developing, building and operating wind farms. Some of these are coming to the end of life. What happens to their grid connection? Because we obviously seek to repower them. Is the grid connection put back into the queue, or is it reserved for the redevelopment, or what happens?
It depends what you want to change. So if you want to replace like for like, then the project will continue. You don't hand back the connection capacity, as it were. But if you want to increase the capacity, that will need to meet the strategic alignment and the readiness criteria.
Okay.
So that might not be possible until there's a strategic spatial energy plan, depending on what part of Great Britain the project is in. It might be possible, it might not. Until we do the queue formation exercise, it's hard to say.
And the restructuring of the grid access, does it differ between distribution connection and transmission connections?
So the scope of connections reform covers all projects connecting to the transmission system and embedded generation, so generation connecting to the distribution system that requires a transmission impact assessment. The threshold for which, I'm going to get this wrong, is
1 megawatt.
Thank you. 1 megawatt in England and Wales today, and it's increasing to 5 megawatts, subject to an Ofgem decision, which I think is expected soon. But Ali can probably speak more to that than I can.
We can probably discuss the details afterwards as well, I guess. There is another question down there. There you go. Thank you. Very clever. Please, Erik.
Yes, my name is Erik Dugstad. I'm working with Vårgrønn, offshore wind developer focusing on the European market and also engaged in the Dogger Bank project and the Greenwald project in the UK. I want to ask you, Ali, about you alluded to it, about the anticipatory investments. So how will that be? Do you foresee that based on the sort of overall strategic plan that it will be possible for NISO to go ahead and plan and then initiate investments to really sort of be ahead of the requirements for the projects?
Yes, in terms of how should we prioritize what infrastructure we build ahead of need? So I think the key there is low risk. So we've identified, a series of, or maybe not low risk, but like low regret projects that will be required under a range of, conceivable scenarios. What we don't want to do is to sort of build something that's quite niche or carries a lot of risk ahead of time, because as I said earlier, if that goes wrong, consumers bear the cost. So it's a case of focusing on, where are the lowest risk projects, and how can we make sure we're building ahead of need with as low regret as possible.
If I could just add to that, the planning processes that I mentioned earlier on, so the strategic spatial energy plan should tell us where generation of different types is needed in the future. That will inform the centralised strategic network plan, which is around the main integrated transmission system, the bulk transfer of power. That means that it shouldn't matter where necessarily in a zone, roughly, the generation appears, but the bulk transfer capacity is there. And then the connections network design methodology, which is part of the connections reform sort of package of work, that's around the local transmission system. That can be more reactive, and the CSNP can be more proactive once we've got SSEP.
Now we're at the acronyms, so that's very good.
Sorry.
I hope there are some more questions on that. Please, over there. And there are drinks afterwards, so stay on.
A quick one. Yeah, my name is Gunnar Løvaas from Statnett, the Norwegian grid operator, and thank you for very interesting presentations. And the similarities to Norway are many and big, and I think we have lots to learn. But we have also done some of the similar things, and cleaned up the queue, etc. The situation is different in the sense that we have a long queue for demand primarily. So our struggle is to where should we get the power from. So you could send some of your project developers over to us and we can offer lower prices, but at least connection opportunities.
Fixed prices, even.
Yeah. But I think your first question was a very interesting one about the market versus the central planning, and I think I would like to hear more about that. Has the market lost its role concerning investments and reinforcements over time, and is it sort of ending up as a dispatch tool in the operations only? That was one question. The other one is 2030 is not within the realistic time frame in Norway. Things are moving much too slow when it comes to licensing, etc. So is it realistic in UK and GB?
Do you want me to take the first one and then you
Yeah,
do
sure.
You can take first one and the second one, I guess,
Yeah.
and you can
Yeah.
add in if you like.
Yeah. So, okay. So what is the role of markets and price signals in the future in what looks like a more centrally planned connections process? So, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, clearly, we've come from a position where everything was provided for through markets, and so the markets effectively delivered a connections queue. For all the reasons I kind of outlined before, that clearly hasn't quite worked. The technology mix is wrong, the queue's too big. So this sort of idea of a top-down connections process informed by strategic plans, that's the reform, so that's the major change. The question then is, okay, so you're making decisions top-down about what connects where. That's effectively what Clean Power 30 says. It's pathways for what technology we need in different regions to achieve the goal of Clean Power 2030. We are clear that we think there is an existing role for price signals, so TNUOS isn't going away, and obviously there's decisions to come on market reform. I think it's probably clear that maybe those price signals need to adapt in some way, but we still think there's very strong benefit still that markets and price signals can provide within the framework that Clean Power 2030 from the top down is providing. So it's effectively, it creates a structure and then market signals and price signals does the rest.
And to the viability.
Yes. No. So I mean, yes. So we've made the commitment to deliver clean power by 2030, and Chris Stark's bought into it. Our Secretary of State's bought into it. We're really trying to deliver the change to accelerate the delivery across GB of energy infrastructure. And it's also not just like looking at 2030, it's also beyond that, when demand is really expected to pick up a lot more, where we'll need to sustain that kind of momentum of deployment. So yeah, I mean, we've set out our pathways, and we understand it is a really challenging goal to achieve, but we are fully aiming to go for it. And
I guess there's a wider point there as well, isn't there? If you set a really ambitious target, even if you don't quite meet it and you get close, that's still good. Yeah. So ambition, it can seem, I suppose it's a bit like the COP26, whatever it was it 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees? I can't quite remember the specifics of it, but anyway, we've spectacularly missed that, clearly. But I think at least having a target then creates an expectation, and it aligns minds towards a common goal. So maybe if 2030 isn't quite achieved, but we get close, then that's a hell of a lot better than how we would have otherwise been with no intervention and no plan.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's what my boss calls stretch targets.
Stretch targets, yeah.
I think as NISO, when we provided the advice, we said it would require a Herculean effort. Yeah. It's doable, but it is a stretch goal. Yeah. In terms of the question about markets versus planning, there's definitely a role for market reform and what that might deliver. I think ultimately government needs to tell us the balance, if you like, between whether we're having a centrally planned system or a market-led system. Ali mentioned earlier investor confidence. The introduction of connections reform is likely, I suspect, to impact upon investor confidence to some degree or other. There are parties that are saying once you get REMA introduced, depending on what the outcome is, you could take away the guide rails, the guardrails, if you like, of connections reform. But as Ali's just said, we've kind of seen the market go wrong and not necessarily deliver what's needed so far, and we've needed to clamp down is probably not the right pair of words, but we've needed to introduce more stringent requirements in terms of what's needed to get into the queue. So it'd be a dangerous move to take them away if you introduce REMA, but ultimately government needs to decide plan-led versus market-led, and then all the other sort of tools in the toolbox, whether it's use of system charging, connection charging, market framework, connections process, all need to work to deliver either the market outcome or the plan outcome.
Over to you.
I think we should leave it at that. I think we are, and Paul, thank you for staying with us as well. I think we are getting thirsty and the ice is melting outside, so we need to hurry up, I believe. A big hand to all the panelists. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you, Paul, for staying on with us. It might be a bit chillier where you are. Here it's getting very hot, so we are waiting for the drinks, as you can hear. Thank you so much for being with us. Just a brief sum up. I've learned a lot through this process of being your moderator, and I hope that you've had some insights as well, even though you are more knowledgeable than me in most of these cases, I believe, in terms of grid and the development of that grid. Some of us are delivering into the UK market. Some of us are building projects in the UK market, so we are keen to understand the details of all of this. We've seen some of that. I think that some of the uncertainty has vanished, or at least has been reduced, I believe. Maybe if they speak to you afterwards, there will be less uncertainty as well. And I hope that we will find common ground in terms of understanding how to deal with grids and renewables, and that someone from the government is also present, and I know that Statnett is here. So there will be learnings to be had across borders. And we didn't touch on interconnectors with hybrid functions. We didn't touch on skills development. And there are a few other points we didn't make, but I hope that you will be able to talk to you guys about that afterwards. Paul, unfortunately, you won't have any drinks, but I hope you will have some at home. And we'll send you those difficult questions afterwards, so you can email us some good answers back. Is that okay? Can you hear us? Yeah, okay, thank you. So thanks to everyone for being with us. Thanks to the Spina for letting me talk in this room. I think I forgot to say, but Jane, not the last ambassador, and not the last before that, I believe, but the last before that, was the one who invited us to come here and bring all the Norwegian companies into the residence in 2010, I believe, in the function at Norwegian Energy Partners. So thank you for that, and thank you for staying on for those 15 years. Thank you. And thanks to the panel again. Give them another big hand. Thank you.